All right, so we are now 5 minutes into the webinar, and we do not have any participants at this time, but we will use the time to record some information about worker cooperatives, and we can then post it in the website. So if you would like to be able to download that, let me know, and we can arrange for that. So cooperatives, worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives is just one of at least 3 different kinds of cooperatives. Cooperatives, what are they? They are a way for groups of people, communities, to get their needs met. And we can look at that from a historical perspective. For example, in about 1844, a group of, 1844 was in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in England, and people were flocking from the country to cities where they worked in factories all of a sudden. And their days were long, they did not get much money in pay. So at one point, some people in a village called Rochdale in England got so fed up with this system that they created their own. They were working in a textile mill, and they got so fed up with that they started their own weavery. They were weavers, so they started a weavery. And also others were fed up with the way they could buy food in grocery stores, because the grocery stores were owned by factory owners. So not only did they pay them very little, the little they did pay them, they got it all back because the people had to spend it all in the grocery stores. So some other people got fed up with that and created their own grocery store. They collected, I think it was 23 pounds, which was a huge fortune at that time, and started a grocery store with some milk, eggs, and such. There had been cooperatives before then, but this was really the first time anybody was really successful at it. And one of the reasons why they were successful was that they created what we now know as the Rochdale principles. There are 7 of them, and the first one is that there is equal access to cooperatives. Everybody in the cooperative has to have some sort of financial skin in the game, and everybody is equal. Everybody has 1 vote. Every member has 1 vote. In traditional companies that we know here from today, is that when you're a shareholder in a company, you vote according to how many shares you have. In cooperatives, it's different. In cooperatives, you vote according to how many persons you are, and that will typically be 1. And there are also rules about cooperatives are autonomous. They cannot have outside influences, and that is one of the reasons why cooperatives are very reluctant to accept investor capital to set themselves up, because investor capital usually comes with some sort of strings attached that will control them. One of the major things about cooperatives is that they are autonomous, so they control themselves. No outsiders are able to control them. And further down the list of the principles is a principle about cooperation between cooperatives and cooperatives in community. The principle about cooperatives, helping cooperatives, became very significant in another milestone in the history of cooperatives in Spain. In Mondragon in Spain, this is a region in the north west part of Spain. where a Catholic priest, just after the Second World War in 1955, I believe, started some sort of a kerosene, started production of some sort of kerosene stoves, because Spain had at that time been devastated by not only World War II, but also by a civil war, and things were really, really bad. So this was one of the ways for them to survive. And they began to start other cooperatives in that region. And by 1959 or so, they decided to create a bank. Everybody who was a worker or a participant, and also the cooperatives themselves, would deposit their funds into this cooperative bank. And that way they will be able to fund new cooperatives. And that's how they grew to now over 74,000 members in that region alone. One of the big success stories that we always use. So that's from a historical standpoint. And you can see, as you can see, they typically solve a problem for people about access to something, for example, such as jobs or food from the grocery store. So yeah. And the grocery store in England was as an example of a consumer co-op. We have consumer co-ops today as well. Many of you may know about credit unions. Credit unions are member-owned, and members participate in the profits in the sense that you get free services like free checking, which you would not get in a regular commercial bank. And also you can vote. You get a chance to nominate officers for the board of directors, and you can even nominate yourself, and you get to vote for who sits on that board. In a regular bank, you would vote according to how many shares in that bank you own, and the profits that you get from owning those shares would also be according to how many shares you own. So in other words, in cooperatives, profits and control are completely separated from capital, in other words. So yeah, another area, another type of cooperatives are producer cooperatives. Producer cooperatives are typically used in agriculture. If farmers were to sell all their products at farmers' markets, they would not get very far. So in other words, to reduce costs and to reach a larger audience, a larger customer group, they formed marketing companies. So in other words, they would sell their milk or oranges or cranberries to marketing companies that they themselves owned and controlled. So one good example of that is Land O'Lakes. Dairy farmers would sell their milk to Land O'Lakes, which they also owns, and then they would get the profits back from the activities of Land O'Lakes. And Land O'Lakes is now a worldwide company. It markets farmers' milk and milk products worldwide. And the same thing with Ocean Spray, which is also a cranberry farmer-owned cooperative for marketing cranberry juice. And Florida's Natural is a producer cooperative. A special variation of this marketing cooperative is Ace Hardware Stores, and until recently also True Value Hardware Stores. True Value hardware stores received an offer from an investor to purchase 70% of the company, and they have voted to do that. So the True Value hardware stores was not owned by shareholders, but by individual mom and pop stores who own and control the company called True Value hardware stores. And the same thing with Ace hardware stores. They are not shareholder owned, they are owned by the individual store owners. And they can then market their services cooperatively and save some money. And that's how they can compete with the big box stores like Home Depot and Lowe's. They get the same discounts as they do, so yeah. And they also have their own distribution centers, so that cuts cost again, so that consumers can get the same prices they can at the big box stores. So a worker cooperative is similar to these consumer and producer cooperatives in the sense that they have members, and members and they do business with their members. And the purpose for setting up a worker cooperative is to have income for its members. In a lot of other respects, worker cooperatives function just like any other company. They have to have a product or service that people will pay money to get. The difference is that in the way they are owned and in the way they are controlled. Traditional companies are typically owned by either an individual or a group of individuals, like a partnership. And these individuals not only control completely the company, they also get all the profits. In a worker cooperative, everybody is an owner and everybody participates in the profits of the company. And everybody participates in governing the company. Everybody's an owner with one share and one vote. So in other words, you cannot purchase a big chunk of a cooperative and because of your ownership, control the company. That is not possible in a worker cooperative. The purpose is not to make you rich or anybody rich. The purpose is to make everybody have decent pay and decent worker conditions. When you have a shareholder-owned company, the sole purpose of doing that is to make a profit, and the bill will be distributed to the shareholders in accordance to how many shares they have. In a worker cooperative, that is one of the goals, to make as much money for the owners as possible. But because they are worker-owned, they can also decide that we want to have other goals, like we want to be sensitive to the environment, for example, or we want to have special benefits for the members, special like we want to have Fridays off, for example. So they can do that because they have the control to do it. So the next question is then, how do you get a cooperative started? One very important thing is the people in it. And you cannot really just put random people together and expect them to get along. That is just not in our human nature. We will have conflicts one way or the other if you just do that. So you need to be very, very selective about who you select to be a member in a cooperative. And there's usually somebody who has a vision with an idea, who will then go out and talk about this idea with his family and friends, and others will catch on to it, and they will eventually start a company together. So those relationships pretty much need to be established before you start a company. Otherwise, you are definitely going to have some major conflict problems. That is one difference between regular companies and worker cooperatives. Where they are the same, we mentioned that before already, is that both of them need to have a service or product that people are willing to pay for. So yeah. One other challenge that worker cooperatives have is financing, because like we mentioned before, they are very reluctant to have outside investors come in and control the company. So most startup cooperatives are either financed by the founders or by debt, meaning loans from somebody. Now, traditional lenders do not understand worker cooperatives, so it's very difficult to obtain loans. But there are 5 institutions, nonprofit institutions called community development financial institutions. They are nonprofit, and they essentially work as investment bankers, because there are many investors who have recognized that worker cooperatives are more resilient, they have better productivity, they have better job satisfaction, and they're more stable than other companies. So they're very interested in investing in them, but because worker cooperatives are reluctant to give up control, they have to channel their funds through these community development financial institutions, or CDFIs as we call them for short. And often they can be done in such a way that it is not debt, but what we call Class B shares. Class A shares are shares that are attached to voting rights. Like in the worker cooperatives, the members of the cooperative have Class A shares. So one share for each member, and they also have one vote attached to that share. Class B shares do not have voting rights. They, in some sense, function a lot like debt, because the investors do not have any controlling part in the company. Where they differ from debt is that the return on this investment is not guaranteed. The shares will say something like, we are hoping that we will be able to return 6% in profits in return on these shares, but we cannot guarantee it at all. And many a time, especially in a startup, we are looking for capital that is patient. Patient means that the investors are willing to wait to get paid they take the long-term view and they're willing to wait to get paid down the road. So in other words, startup will typically may not be profitable for at least a couple of years, and profits may not be paid out on the Class B shares until a couple of years down the road. Yeah. So because it's very important who becomes a member of these worker cooperatives, many cooperatives have a incubation period. If you want to become a member of the cooperative, you will first be hired as a regular employee. You will have your job just like everybody else, But up front, it is told to you that when you've been with the company and everybody agrees to it, after 1 year or 6 months or whatever the cooperative has decided, you can then apply to become an owner member. And then the members will vote. Then if you are accepted, you will then become a member. Yes, that will, it's not like you buy an existing share, you will get an additional share. So in a sense, the existing number of shares will be diluted a little bit by one when you become a member. But it's not essential. The buy, we call it the buy-in, the Class A share that each member would have to vote, is somewhat symbolic, but it also guarantees, for investors that you are serious about the success of this company, and you will contribute to it with your own money that you put into the company. And the other side is that you signal, when you put money into the company, you decide, you signal to the other workers in the company that you are serious about the survival of this company. Because if the company goes down and becomes bankrupt, you will lose your money. On the other side, if the company is successful, you will all gain by being able to pay yourself fair wages and perhaps even some profits on the other side. So that's a little bit about cooperatives in general and worker cooperatives in particular. And at this point, I would have normally have had to open it up to questions about it. But since we do not have any participants today, we will simply end the webinar here and post it on the website for, if it's decent quality, we will post it on the website so you can access it later on. And we will then, in the meantime, start looking for another webinar some other time about a different subject.